You are listening to the ParkFlyer podcast, where we discuss our RC adventures.
Welcome to the ParkFlyer podcast, where we discuss the ups and downs of the new RC Flyer. Join your hosts, Michael and Jay, as they take flight at the park. Now on with the show.
Hello, everybody. Welcome again to the ParkFlyer podcast. I'm Michael, and with me always,
Jay here in Texas.
And we got
Mike from Alaska.
There you go. We got Mike B with us again tonight. That's awesome. He's becoming a regular host on the ParkFlyer podcast, which we enjoy.
Well, he's an interesting guy.
Yeah. Well, he's got some good stories, too.
He's had a few mishaps. I've seen him. I've survived them.
That's right. Well, how's things?
And I have a face for radio. So
is that what your mama told you? Okay.
Yes. A face for radio. That's always
gorgeous.
Good. Yeah. Yeah, no doubt. Well, how's things down in Texas, Jay?
As always, it's hot and still hot and more hot. So, yes.
Yeah, there you go. Well, hopefully it'll cool off.
It is cooling off a degree here or two, so it's getting there.
Oh, good. Oh, good. And Mike, you're probably looking at some snowfall here shortly.
Yeah, probably by the end of the month we'll get our first bit of snow.
Well, good. Well, tonight we're going to talk about CG, which is your center of gravity, and then how to find it. Each one of us have had issues where we've had airplanes that have not been in a CG, or we haven't had a very good experience with that CG. And we figured since there's some guys out there that are new to the Park Flying podcast, or if you're a pro, it doesn't really matter. It's always good to kind of review how to find your CG and what that entails.
But Mike, why would you have to find the CG or figure it out? Because don't the instructions tell you where they're at? I mean, like.
Why, funny you say that, Jay. Ha-ha. The instructions are not always correct.
Get out. Just because it's in Chinglish, it may be wrong.
Oh, yeah. Funny you say that, because the instructions are not always correct. For instance, I had, for those of you that remember, Hyperion, which you haven't really heard too much from them lately, but it used to be a very, very large company, and they were, if you were going to buy a balsa wood product, that's really who you went to, is the Hyperion guys. So they came out with this really, really nice SU, it was a Sukhoi, I think, SU-31, and I decided that I wanted to purchase it. It was my first balsa model. I got it. It was almost ready to fly, put it together. Great pains to, try and figure out everything. Got it all measured out, glued together, epoxied, the whole deal. And in the description for all of the throws and the center of gravity, it said that I needed about 108 millimeters from the leading edge. Now, it wasn't a large airplane. It was, kind of a moderate size. But I will tell you that 108 millimeters from the leading edge put the CG at the trailing edge.
Whoops.
Of the wing. So it was a little difficult to get that measured out and then try to balance it. Now, I will tell you that I have a Great Plains CG machine. It's basically two plastic, or it's an aluminum frame, and it's got 2 points that you lay the wing on, and then you can kind of move these little plastic pieces to be at whatever the range is, and then you can kind of balance it. So you do most of the balancing after you build it, and then you put the battery and the ESC and all of your components in there, and then you can move the battery forward or aft in order to balance the airplane. Now, center of gravity in an airplane works a lot like a teeter-totter or seesaw, whatever you want to call it, on the playground. If you have a large individual on one end and a small individual on the other, it's out of balance. If you move the larger individual towards the center of the fulcrum point, you can actually get the two of you to balance, and then you can actually make the teeter-totter work. The airplane works, big airplanes, small airplanes, doesn't matter. Real aircraft work with a CG range as well. And the CG usually is from the firewall, and they measure back, and then depending on how much weight, fuel, cargo, all of that stuff, it'll balance, and then it makes the airplane fly better in the air. Well, back to the Sukhoi, it had 108 millimeters from the leading edge of the wing. It was a misprint. I will tell you right up front, it was not correct. It was supposed to be 85 millimeters from the leading edge, and they put 108. So there was a little bit of a disconnect there. And 108 to 85, that difference made the airplane incredibly uncontrollable. So I'm a pilot, so I understand CG, and I just took for what they put, right on the directions. I took it for, their word for it, and I balanced it out, and the battery was really far back. Well, I will tell you that when I went to go fly this airplane, not pretty. It took off and immediately was tail heavy, so the airplane just went skyward. Luckily for me, Hyperion has great motors, and it went vertical, so I was able to get a lot of altitude very, very quickly. Now, the bad news is that any motion in the stick caused this thing to just be out of control. It had the worst pitch motion I've ever seen. And I'd been flying for a while when I got this, so I was used to foamies having, wild gyrations and that kind of thing, and I had been flying 3D for a while. But this airplane, it was terribly uncontrollable. And when I pulled the power to idle, I could get it to level out, but it kept wanting to the tail kept wanting to tuck under, or the nose would fall, and it was really a terrible scene. I wound up trying to come into land, because I knew something wasn't right, and I tried 3 or 4 times and very unsuccessful at getting a good glide in. So I made the mistake there, Jay, of asking one of the other guys in the club if he said, "Oh, I have an airplane just like this." And I go, "You do?" He said, "Yeah." I go, "Can you land it?" And he said, "Sure." So I handed him my controller. I will never do that again.
Didn't end up well, huh?
No. And mainly because he had the same problem I did. The CG was way out of whack, and he came in really, really fast, had the power going, and he basically slammed it onto the ground, ripped the gear clean off, cartwheeled the airplane down, did some pretty good damage to the aircraft. When I looked at it, I was like, "Oh my gosh, you just crashed my airplane." He says, "Yeah, same thing happened to mine." So
he was honest. I love that.
Yeah,
that plane flies terrible. That's what happened to my plane.
Exactly.
That sounds like that movie where the guy says, "Does your dog bite?" And he says no, and then he reaches over and the dog bites him. He goes, "I thought you said your dog didn't bite."
That's not my dog.
That's not my dog.
Exactly right. Yeah, it happened like that. So the mistake that I made was, once again, RC Group's guys were out there complaining about it quite a bit, and the directions were wrong. It should have been 85 millimeters. And I will tell you, after flying many, many years, that the leading edge of the airplane is usually a great place to start for CG. And I would never go past the wing spar for a CG mark. So I would go from the leading edge of the wing to where the wing spar is, but anything past the wing spar, you were literally getting into a tail-heavy aft CG, and it's going to be slightly uncontrollable. And you find that as well, right?
Yeah, right. I think what's the adage or the old saying, something like a tail or a nose-heavy plane flies heavy and slow, but a tail heavy plane flies only once, or something like that.
That's about
so.
Yeah, that sounds
so.
about
As
right.
long as it's always nose heavy, yeah, the plane will be hard to pull up. You may, but it will fly. But like you said, having something that's tail heavy, you're lucky to get it back on the ground. So I think we've all been there for sure.
Yeah. Well, the Sukhoi, unfortunately, I tried several different things to get it put back together and wound up never flying it again. It never really balanced out correctly. The gear wouldn't fit correctly. The gearbox was totally ripped out. It just wound up having some internal issues, and And unfortunately, it got retired at a very young age. But it taught me a very valuable lesson, once again, to always look at your CG. And most of the airplanes nowadays, almost ready to fly, they have some pretty good manuals. They've kind of figured it out. But almost all of my airplanes balance right pretty close to the wing spar or a little up front. And Jay's correct. And Jay's correct in the fact that if it's nose heavy, you'll get a little bit faster speed out of it, a little bit more controllable. It becomes more stable because it's always heading downhill. The landing may be a little bit faster, but it will be a little bit controllable. So when you maiden a flight or you build an airplane, I would always start at the forward end of the CG or at least a little bit towards the front for my first flight. I wouldn't go towards the back of the CG. And it's usually a range. So it's usually a range of, somewhere between the wing spar and the leading edge of the aircraft.
Right. So it's usually that's the first 1/3 of the wing, the first third of the wing. And that's probably right around where the spar, you'll see that spar is the first third of the wing. So.
And that's at the wing root, not at the wing tip.
Right.
So, yeah. So right along the bottom.
But when you balance it, like before you fly it, you put it on your fingers or whatever to check the CG, right? And you did the Sukhoi that way. It balanced, right? I mean, because you had the battery where it needed to be to balance it at the wrong CG point.
That is correct. Right? That is correct. So, like I said, I have the CG
show
machine.
Me their plane and say, look, the CG's right on. And it's like, okay, it balances right where your fingers are. That's true. But, that doesn't necessarily. Well, I mean, I think it's a reasonable
No, right.
thing,
But if you,
right?
but if when you're
what you're taught,
but if you're balancing it at the very back of the plane, and that's where it balances.
Right.
Well, no, I get that too. But Mike's point about the spar is a good one. Isn't it one-third the chord, Mike, for most fixed?
Usually, yes. Yeah.
And the chord being the leading edge to the trailing edge.
That is correct.
Okay,
that is correct.
So if you're balancing it behind 1/3 the chord, then maybe there's a problem.
There is. Now, I'm not gonna assume that there's guys out there that won't balance it a little bit further back. If you have a large airplane and you're doing 3D maneuvers, I actually go to that. Not to the trailing edge of the wing, but I'll go to the back of the CG because I want any vertical hovering maneuvers will do much better if it's a tail heavy airplane, not necessarily a nose heavy. But you have to be careful with that because you have to have enough horsepower basically in your motor that if the airplane's hovering, it'll actually pull it out of that tail heavy situation. Yeah.
So now I heard there's also a trick. Let's say you're flying your plane and you want to discover if it's nose or tail heavy. And it has to do something with flipping the plane over and letting go of the controls, which doesn't exactly sound natural, but.
Yeah, that's true. A lot of the airplanes, especially if they're a sport flyer or a 3D flyer, you can actually balance it to where it's upright or inverted. And if you're going to do a lot of inverted maneuvers, you don't want to push a ton of forward stick on it. So in order to figure that out, you balance the airplane upright, take it on a flight, get out there and get all the bugs worked out. And then when you get ready, you can roll it inverted and actually see how much forward stick you have to push. Because remember, if it's inverted, you're pushing forward on the stick. Now, if you're maxed out and you're all the way to the top of the radio and you've got no more stick and it's still flying and descending, then your CG is probably farther forward than you want it, and you can move it back. If you have no forward stick on there and the airplane's flying level, you're probably towards the tail end of the CG. So you want to be able to put a little bit of forward pressure, not a lot. You don't want your stick to move, halfway to the max. You want it to move, I'd say about an eighth,
right?
Or maybe even a little less.
Just a bit of pressure. You're fine.
Yeah, just a little bit of pressure, and you can fly around and then roll it upside down, and it'll help if you're doing aerobatic type maneuvers because you're just slightly forward of the most rear CG is the best way to put it, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So, but you mentioned something the other day when we were talking about it really has to be a symmetrical wing for that to be true, though, because if you have a flat bottom wing, you're going to have to give it more elevator, push forward on the stick more, right? Or did I get that wrong?
Say that again. If you have a flat bottom wing,
yeah, you're gonna have to push. If you invert it, you're gonna have to push forward on the stick a lot more.
Yes, that is correct. Right. Well, because the way the airflow works, the high pressure along the wing actually accelerates over the top part of the wing. So the chord or the round part of the wing, that part right there creates a low pressure. So now what happens is if you're inverted, the low pressure is underneath it and the high pressure is on the top of it. So in order to hold it there, you have to actually get enough up motion or enough pitch to where you're, kind of evening that out. So you're basically using, the thrust over top of that. So aircraft aerodynamics. Yeah, exactly. Aerodynamics are always the high pressure seeks the low pressure, and wants to move into that area. And if you had it inverted, that high pressure's on top is trying to get down below. So it does make it.
I guess I just wanted to make sure that that people listening would understand that if you have to push your stick forward a little bit more, to maybe not think that your CG is wrong for inverted flight, because if the wing is not made for inverted flight, well, then you're going to end up fighting yourself about where the CG should actually be.
That's agreed. I agree with Mike on that. Right. He's correct.
And also the type of plane that is, for our listeners, is traditionally more of a trainer style aircraft. Have flat bottom wings, so don't think that your plane's terribly nose heavy because of that.
Right. Well, and during loops and rolls and that kind of thing, that really doesn't. I mean, if you had a good CG and you had a non symmetrical wing, that would be okay. You can still do loops and rolls, half Cuban eights, all that kind of stuff with a trainer type airplane with the flat bottom. It's just flying inverted for longer periods of time is probably going to be a little less, a little harder than it would be with a 3D or an aerobatic type airplane because of the way the wing is designed.
Right. And typically, I was ready to say low wings. They could be flat bottom too, but typically they're an aerodynamic, wing or chord on them. So those sport planes, 3D planes, low wings, typically have that style of wing as opposed to trainer aircraft.
Yeah, I will tell you that a real live aircraft, the Extra 300L, if you look at the wings, the top of the wing is flat, and the bottom of the wing has a little bit of a dihedral. So if you took the wings off and you set them on the ground, they would literally rock back and forth. But if you flip the wing upside down, it would lay flat.
Right. Well, it's designed to do something very specific. So,
agreed. But that's what I'm saying is that you can take that same design and flip it upside down, and now you have a trainer where you have the flat on the bottom.
Yes.
And yeah, so they've turned it upside down, which means that it doesn't fly. When it flies inverted, you have to push a little bit harder on the stick to get it to, to maintain that inverted flight.
Okay. Well, that's that's kind of crazy thinking, but you want that aircraft to be unstable, sorta. So,
well, sorta. You want it to be the more rearward your CG is, the more it's not controllable, but the more what's the word I'm looking for? It's
a real pitch.
It is a real pitch. That's.
I was just saying that to my wife the other day.
Exactly. That's pretty funny. I don't want to say the word unstable, but the more maneuverable, I guess, is a better way to put it. So if you have a little bit of rear CG, the airplane is going to become a little more pitch sensitive. It will be a little more maneuverable than if you had a nose heavy airplane.
Right.
And now you had a problem with the wing, I think, in your CG there, Jay.
Yeah, well,
or was it Mike?
Both of us, I guess. Mike's was a little bit more pronounced because he had a smaller wing, which magnified the problem.
Right.
So, Mike, remember when we took your tough wing, we put it all together, and we'd already built the bigger tough wing and put your little tough wing together, and we thought, all right, it should just take off and fly and have not a problem. And there we even knew what the CG was, but it turned out to be a little bit more difficult than we thought, right?
Yeah, I think that the good news is that it was a tough wing, because I think I crashed that thing 20 times before I actually flew it.
Putting it lightly.
Yeah.
Now, was it just not getting airborne, or when you threw it, did it not
we were
fly?
throwing it in the air fine, and all that was working. Just that because I was using, I think it was designed to have a 1300 milliamp.
Right. So we were basically, they give you, like most planes, they say, okay, use motor X and use battery X. Mm-hmm. And of course, we're like, well, we don't have motor X and we don't have battery X. But these motors are pretty close in equivalency for power, yada, yada, yada. But, the motor might weigh a few grams more. What's a few grams? And the battery we're using isn't as big or heavy as, battery X. But it's pretty close. So what would that really matter? It's not that big of a deal. But we forgot a golden rule about delta wings or style wings, and that is the chord is totally different than in a conventional aircraft, and therefore it makes it a little bit more unstable when you're flying it, as we soon discovered.
Right.
Well, in addition to the fact that the wing was smaller, physically smaller, there's less range for the balance.
Right.
Yeah, we basically had a perfect storm. And it was frustrating because I owned the bigger version of the plane and had many hours behind it. And I was like, why isn't this working? I know, we'd start flying it. It would fly okay, kind of. And then we'd do a maneuver or we'd do something, and then things would go horribly wrong. I think that's how it was going, Mike.
It was going horribly wrong quite often. But to add insult to injury here, this was my first wing ever.
So of course you're getting the excitement of, hey, this really sucks. I don't like the way this flies.
Right.
I think I said I was going to fly it anymore at least once or twice.
Wow.
This is a dumb plane. I don't want this plane anymore.
And now look at us. We fly those things all over. That's funny.
Well, I don't fly the little one very much, but the thing is squirrely. And the other thing that was an issue is that if you have too much throw,
and we had too much throw,
such
for
a short wingspan, that caused instant problems as well. So having too much throw and the CG being off. I think I ended up I used 1,000 milliamp batteries, and I ended up having to put this huge washer.
Hey, I don't even know where you got that washer from.
I ended up measuring.
I don't even know what that went to.
I end up weighing the 1,300 milliamp and 1,000 and figuring out what the difference in grams was. And then I just found this washer that just happened to be approximately that amount, and I just taped it to whenever I use those thousands, I just taping it right to those batteries, and then we had success on a regular basis.
And luckily, we were flying the right plane in the sense that it was the tough wing. So when we crashed, and we kept having these crashes, and then I would fly it, and I was still having problems. And like I said, being that it was such a small model, it automatically made it twitchy, because it was smaller. And so the wind affected it.
How big was it? How big was
24 inch, 25 inch, 24 inch wingspan.
24 inch.
The big brother of it's 32. Right. So
that's the one we have, right?
All of us fly the bigger version.
Right.
So,
and it really is night and day difference, just at 6 inches.
You wouldn't think you wouldn't think that would be, but it really does make a difference on that plane. Not only do you have a smaller CG range, also makes the plane short coupled, and then on the other fact where on the 32 inch, when we have for our control surfaces, not to say we have a ton of we don't. Not like flying a 3E plane where we have, the barnyard throws on it. But, we have good throws on those wings. We don't necessarily need them, but then it's a reduction factor, So what looks about right is not right. It needs to be way less than that. So when I was looking at it, like, oh, those throws are, that's medium. That's fine. That was way too much. So we would compound the problem. So the planes kind of get its tail heavy-ish. it's starting to go out of control. You start adding more control to stop what's going out of control, and now you're stalling the wing out. You're you have too much control in it, and it was the perfect storm. It was the perfect storm.
Well, I will tell you, if you have a very rearward CG and you have very serious throws, that is
it's a recipe for disaster. Believe me, folks. Yeah.
Well, you're just going to over control it, and as a result, it's going to start flipping over on its back, or it turns inside itself.
Exactly what it did. You don't even have to be there anymore.
Yeah.
Plus,
well, I've flown enough. I understand.
Plus, being a light aircraft, if we went out and we flew and it was a little windy, and once again, our I guess calibration was off, right? Because I'm going, oh, that wind's. I'd fly my other tough wing in this, no problem. Or I'd fly my other planes in this, no problem. Well, you have this really light aircraft because it was very, very light. Even though it was EPP, it was pretty light. Plus, a little windier than what you're supposed to, a little bit too much control, and it's rearward, So, like I said, you take off, you're flying. Okay, it's flying okay. And then you get a gust of wind. And so you go to recover, and it just gets you in the situation. Next thing, the plane's tumbling out of the sky. And it was frustrating. Right. It really was.
Well, when in our last episode, I think I mentioned that we had made into wing, the Hobby King wing. And it was very small, and I think I'd talked about it going into a flat spin or whatever. But I think that was the problem, too, is that just the way the control surfaces were, I had dialed them up a little bit to try and get a little bit more throw out of them because it just felt like it was not getting enough. And we had the battery kind of sitting a little too far back. And even though it's a single cell battery, those smaller wings are more critical. Anytime the airplane gets to that small version, it gets more critical for the CG. So you want to be a little more exact. But I think on the wings or on a conventional airplane, anything past that, the wing, there's not really a wing root on a wing.
Well, a wing is a little different. So where we have the one third the wing on a conventional wing.
Right.
Well, on a delta wing style aircraft, it's at 1/2. It's 1/2, 1/2 the chord. So it's way back there. So usually if you have a battery bay or a bay for your escape or something back there, it's usually right around there or right before the motor. It's that far back.
Right.
And it doesn't look like it should be, but that's about 1/2 the chord because, once again, delta wing kind of goes out and all of that is counted. And that's what kind of throws you off in your mind. You're thinking, oh, it has to be way up by the nose. Nope. It's, right back in the main body of the aircraft or a little further back than that.
Well, how weird is this that while we're sitting here, I got an email from Peter from our FPV episode, and he was mentioning when we flew the wing, we were talking about it, and he sent me an email that says, yes, flying wings are very sensitive with the center of gravity. Make sure the CG is right, and it should fly. So that's pretty funny that we're talking, and he sent me an email exactly on the subject that we're talking about.
Exactly.
How weird is that?
Now,
anyway,
the other part that's kind of frustrating when flying with Mike's little wing, like you said, he was flying two different size batteries, right? So he was flying 1,000 milliamp and he was flying a 1,300. And so, it doesn't seem like it would be that many ounces between the two batteries. But there was
there's a significant weight difference between those.
But you wouldn't think so.
You're talking several grams.
But
grams.
That's a lot.
Well, it is a lot. But I'm just saying, if you were to just look at the batteries, you're like, 1,000, 1,300. How much can that be? Right. Like you said, it was enough. So that kind of gets you to that, like me, I hate adding nose weight. I hate adding dead weight.
Oh yeah, I don't.
So for me, that's the other part of this when you're trying to figure out CGs and stuff like that. The nice part about conventional planes, you can usually fly a range of batteries in a plane. Usually wings, it's usually like one battery and that's it. So like in our tough wings, we can get away with flying. We can fly a 3 or 4 cell, and they are two different size batteries, but they weigh about the same. You can fly with a 3 cell 2200 or a 4 cell 1800, milliamp battery, but they weigh the same. And that's one way we can get away with that. But you just can't take a 2700 milliamp battery, throw it in the wing, and go fly. Where you could fly, like take my Fun Cub, you could fly a 27 or 3300 milliamp battery in that, or you could fly a 2200 milliamp battery in it. It just doesn't seem to care. You might have to move it around a little bit in the fuselage a little bit, but it's not terribly much. Where a wing, you don't have the room to move the battery or hardly at all. So that's one of those crucial things.
Right. Well, I mean, the weight and balance of an airplane, I mean, we talk a little bit about the CG, and we don't really talk about the weight and balance. But they're both connected in the fact that, your weight of the airplane has to be such that the power can overcome, part of that weight. So as you start moving it through the air, then the lift is going to overcome the drag and the weight, and your airplane's going to fly. The balance part of it is going to help it fly straight and level, and not going to, it's not going to want to pitch towards the ground or pitch up unless you do something. So you should be able to trim your aircraft with the right weight and balance and the right CG that it just flies, the first time you get out and maiden it, when you fly straight and level, you should be able to release your thumbs off the stick or your fingers off the stick, and it should maintain level flight. You don't want it pitching up or down or doing something crazy because then something is out of sorts.
Like for you, when you choose a plane or you go to buy a plane or whatever you're going to get, like you have a couple of deciders for you. Like you have a range of batteries that you like to fly all the time. Like you like 3-cell 2200 batteries. So you pick planes that pretty much, fly those things when you go to look for a new plane or you want something new to fly. That's one of the things. That's one of your deciders as to whether you get a plane or not, right?
You mean for me or for Mike?
It is for me. Yeah, no, it is for me because I choose not to have. I don't want to have the inventory of different batteries. If I can just have the one battery, the one type of battery, then I can always just use that battery in whatever planes I happen to be flying that day. And so it gives me that flexibility or actually reduction of having to spend money on extra batteries of different sizes. But that's why I chose that. But I have a question regarding a plane I have. It's an MX2.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think Hobby King sells it anymore. But this plane, when it came from the factory, it actually had like a 3-ounce weight that they gave you to put in the plane.
Okay, so they're wanting you to add weight to the nose or something, or?
Yep.
Okay.
And you had to put nose weight. Now, what I discovered, the goal is this was a 3D plane, or supposed to be a 3D plane, but the motor that came with it was severely underpowered for that. Well, I guess it probably wouldn't be severely if I chose to fly a 1300, but given my recent statement, I chose to fly a 2200 in it. And so it flew. It flew fine, but even with the 1300, I would have had to, and with the weight, I would have had to, or did have to, move the battery well into the fuselage where you didn't really have access in order to get the thing to balance.
Right.
So what are the suggestions you guys would, in that case, if you found a plane like that, I think the things that come to mind that I might do to fix that would be, first of all, get a bigger motor.
That's what I was about. I was going to say, are you American? Yeah, go bigger.
Get a big
go
motor.
Bigger. So I could get a bigger motor for it. That would solve two problems, right? One would be that it would produce weight, and I could get rid of the nose weight, as well as the fact that it would give it the power I need to be able to 3D fly that thing properly.
Right. Like what I would do is, I'd go ahead and weigh how big the weight was. So I'd take out the motor that they came with it, throw it on there so I can say, let's say it's 50 grams. And let's say they said they gave you like 30 gram weight to go with it. So, you can go up to an 80 gram motor, and that would take the place of that. So then I would just look for a motor that swung about the same size prop, and I would probably go with something like that. Or I would go with a slightly more, I'd go with a slightly more powerful motor. It depends what you want to do. Do you want to fly longer, or do you want to fly, or how you want to fly? If you're just going to fly it around, sport fly it, then I'd say you could probably keep the motor, and then I would look for a bigger battery, right? That took up that 30 grams. And so if, you were able to fly a 2200 motor in there, no problem. Well, now you might be able to fly a 4000 or a 4500 size milliamp battery in there and just be able to put it around the sky all day. Now you'd be able to fly around for 15, 20 minutes if you want to. It depends. Right. That's honestly, that's what it comes down to you. How do you want to fly the plane?
Well, if they were giving you, could you have flown it without the weight? You think?
Not with the recommended battery.
Yeah, not with the recommended battery. That's right. It would have been
tail heavy.
Very tail heavy. It was hard enough to fly if you put the battery where they told you to put it.
Mm-hmm.
And with the weight. I found that I really had to, a whole battery's length forward to get it.
Did you have enough room to put it forward like that?
Well, yeah, the whole front of the plane was open, but the problem was getting the battery to stay in its position.
Right.
Because it was a sealed environment.
Right.
The only way I could have fixed it would be cut a big hole in the top of the plane so I could access that.
So you had to do major
do
modifications in order to make it work.
Yeah. So what I did for a while was I had a skewer I stuck in there that stopped the battery from sliding back towards the middle of the plane. And I did that for a while, but then I didn't really like doing it. It was kind of a hassle to do that. So I finally ended up putting in a piece of foam to hold the escape out of the way, and then it was because of that piece of foam. Now it was narrow enough that when I put the battery in place, it wouldn't slide around.
Yeah, I use foam quite a bit. I probably have about 3 or 4 airplanes that actually have foam pieces that I'll fold in half, or to try and get my battery to stay where it needs to be, or keep it in, keep it in.
So in this case, I actually made a brick of foam that I shoved the battery in there, and then I shoved this brick of foam after it.
A brick, yeah, a brick of foam.
It's the size of
a foam brick.
Foam. It's as big as a battery, right? The foam I made is the size of a battery,
right?
And in length of a battery. And I shoved the battery in there, and then I shoved this foam in there.
To
keep it in place so it doesn't slide around.
Yeah, and like I said, I do that as well. So
yeah, and that works. That works fine. But it's still a pain in the butt to get the battery in and out because it has to go slide all the way forward. And plus, I don't get the 3D ability out of the plane that I'd like to get. So I think that in the end, the best answer would be for me to stop fooling around with this setup and buy a better motor or a different motor that's heavier.
You could. You just got to be careful because depending on the type of motor that you're going to get, if you can move up just even slightly and change your whole dynamics from your ESC and your battery. So
what do you mean?
Well, if you had let's just use Hacker for instance. If you had a Hacker 2010 that uses a 3-cell battery and a 35 amp escape. If you moved up to a Hacker 30, it's a lot heavier battery, but now you just jumped up to a 50 or 60 amp escape and a 4 to 5 cell battery. So
you're saying a bigger motor is going to make more draw on the escape.
Well, I'm just saying that, from a weight perspective, we're talking about weight and balance. So the weight of the airplane, if you had a light profile foamy that was not, balancing out correctly, and you said, oh, I'm just going to stick a bigger motor on the front of it, that motor could have a lower KV and require a larger battery, much larger than what you want. Because you can actually find smaller motors that weigh more, but they're a 6-cell motor. You're not going to put a 6-cell in a foamy.
It's America, isn't it?
So I know it's America, but you're talking about a weight issue now. That even though you have this motor battery combo, now this foam airplane that's supposed to weigh ounces is weighing 2 or 3 pounds. And it's not going to want to fly. The wings are not going to be able to support it.
Well, wait. We're being very specific here, though, that the motor that I would buy would have to replace the weight that they maybe put in the plane.
Right.
And it would allow me to maybe move the battery back towards the cockpit instead of being the front of the plane.
And that's correct. And just to be clear, what I'm saying is that if you looked at the motor and the motor weighed 10 grams and they gave you 40 grams of weight, okay, that's 50 grams, right?
Right.
So now you have to buy a 50-gram motor. Well, if you go look at a 50-gram motor, some of those motors may be larger. You know, I mean, they may weigh 50 grams, but they may take a totally different battery escape combo than what you're using. I totally understand that if you're going to say these, you know, I already have the 3-cell battery and I already have the 35 amp escape and I have this particular motor. You just got to make sure, is what I'm saying, that when you buy, just don't go buy a motor that's 50 grams. You got to make sure that the motor that you're buying at 50 grams works with your battery and your escape, because you run the risk moving motors. When you move up, you run the risk of having the next size battery and ESC as well.
Right.
That's all.
Right. And we talked about this in one of our other
podcasts
podcasts about, you know, how to determine what motors go, you know, to replace actual gas motors and stuff. And basically it kind of comes down to, you know, for like Mike's plane, I think it takes like a 9-inch prop, right? 11-inch prop. Yeah. So basically, you know, it has, you have a motor that can swing an 11-inch prop, and, you know, it weighs 30 grams heavier than the motor that he has. And so this is where it takes doing a little bit of research. You jump on Hobby King, or you jump on whatever, or you jump on RC groups and look at the thread of that particular plane, because I'm sure somebody else has figured that out and they already have a motor recommendation. You know,
right, and I agree, but I'm take the NTM motors from Hobby King, for instance. You can go to the 40, or let's go to the 30. You can go to the 30 size, and you can find a 30 size that's got a KV that'll do a 3-cell, a KV that'll do a 4-cell, a 5-cell, and a 6-cell. They're all 35. They all weigh the same.
Right. There's
not a difference. It's just the KV is lower or higher.
Yes.
So I was just suggesting to Mike, you can't just blanket say, oh, I'm going to go buy a bigger, fatter motor with more weight, without doing the research to make sure that the weight that you're adding is still in your motor escape.
So once again, if I did make it clear from before, right, you already know that it was swinging like a range of a 10-inch to a 12-inch prop. You know, so that's what this plane's swinging for clearance, for it to, go over the ground. So that's the size prop that you're looking for. You know that it has to weigh 50 grams, like you were saying. And that's when you'd go on to RC groups and start looking at the 50-gram motors. It's going to take a little while. That swing this prop in this particular range that's running the same, you want to stay with your 3-cell. And, so you're looking at the range as well to go, okay, it's a 3-cell motor. It weighs 30 grams more. It can swing a 10-inch prop or 11-inch, 12-inch prop. And take all three of those things into consideration. So don't blindly buy, this weighs exactly 80 grams more, or if it weighs 50 grams, I'll just take that one.
Right.
And it's going to be
that's what I was saying.
3,000 kV motor. It can only take a 2-cell and run a 2-inch prop. That's not going to do you any good.
Right.
That makes sense.
So for your particular aircraft, Mike, it seems that most of the guys are flying a 2836 with a 30 amp ESC, and that's giving them the weight that they can throw the lead in the nose. They can throw it out and just use that 20 gram heavier motor in order to be able to get the right CG.
There you go. RC groups to the rescue again.
Okay. So there you go. Yeah. So I guess the big question is now, is to make sure that it's not really a question, but the big concern is to make sure that you get your CG correct before you go made in your airplane. And, there's probably half a dozen products on the market that will help you with that. You can take a tape measure basically and measure back whatever it says and put a little dot on there or a marker and use your fingers. That's not the best way to do it, but it'll get you in the right ballpark.
It's worked on many a plane for me.
Yeah. But there are, like I said, CG machines. So The one I have is from Great Plains. It works great. I think Jay has the same one. I'm not sure if Alaska Mike has that one or not, but there are some wooden ones, metal ones,
PVC.
Just the way
a good buddy of mine made one out of PVC pipe. He went on RC Groups, got the idea, built one. Cost him, I don't know, $8, I think, with PVC parts, and built me he built it for me, and I ended up giving it up to another beginner pilot because I already had one. But it was all out of PVC pipe. That was kind of cool.
Yeah, and I know that guys have made them out of wood as well. It's just a kind of an L bracket, and they put a little pin on there, and then you just kind of set it in there and move it around. But it is most important to be able to fly an airplane. If you're going to maiden it, if you've built it, it's very important to get your CG correct. It will make your life way, way more.
Well, I was very sad. I don't know if Alaska Mike has a good story, because he did a lot of training for guys up in Alaska when I was up there, of guys coming up and, hey, I'm going to fly my plane, or I'm going to do whatever. And, what's the CG? Well, I don't know. Or
yeah, because you do get those guys. Yeah. I mean, I've had those guys too, where you're like, okay, is it balance? And they're like, what? What do you mean? Is it balance? Did you do a CG test or what? Well, no, I just put everything in there, and you pick it up and it just like about falls out. Because the battery's like.
Or I like
on
the idea
tail.
of what Jay said. He's like, well, yeah, the CG's right.
Yeah.
Yep. And then it's like, well, that's right because they follow the instructions, which are wrong.
Exactly.
Right.
So then you end up, the plane crashes. Like, what happened? Well, the CG was off. That can't be right. I tested it. It was right where they told me to put it. Oh.
Right. Well, and that was in my case with the Sukhoi.
Most of the training I do, Jay, is on my own plane, so I know the CG is right.
Yeah, he's not gonna run my risk, because I'm always taking somebody else's airplane up. But Mike's a smart one. He's gonna say, we'll just train on mine, and you got a buddy box and train with those guys. That's pretty funny. Well, so we talked about wings, conventional airplanes, jets, EDFs. I will tell you that the EDFs, they have usually swept wings, and they have a CG that balances a little bit in front of the wing spar as well from the wing root. The difference in the EDF is that you're going to need to be able to move the battery to where it has a little bit of it's going to sit tail low, but the CG is going to be forward of the wing spar. So there is kind of a little disconnect there when people think, it's not sitting correctly. So they try to move the battery back, and they're shifting the CG at the same time.
That sounds terrible.
It can be, trust me, you and I have flown my F-18 where it had too forward of a CG and never got off the ground.
Yeah, well, it got off the ground, went through the trees, kept going through the trees.
Strainer. That's true. It did get off the ground, but yeah, if the CG is not correct, it won't. It just if it's too far forward, it's not going to lift off. It just does not have enough elevator to get the nose, off the ground. And once again, you have to think about it as that playground. The little teeter totter or seesaw, whatever you want to call it. The oversized kid. I mean, I grew up in a non-political world, so you always put the fat kid on the one side, and you and the other guy got on the other side. Because the heavier set kid would always be sitting on the ground, and you're up there jumping up and down trying to get this teeter-totter to come down. And so the same holds true for the airplane.
So is that why every time we fly in your 300 extra, you always get in the back? Because, more weight, more of the weight has to go in the back because you don't want to have a nose heavy aircraft.
No, the pilot flies from the back. That's why I get in there. Nice try, though. You telling me I need to go on a diet?
What?
That's what you're telling me. I can tell.
No.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
does this plane make me look
Yes, it does.
It's
you look huge.
It's not the plane that makes you look fat. Not the plane that makes you look fat. It's the fat that makes you look fat.
Oh, okay.
Oh, all right.
No, I'm actually trying to lose some weight. So it has nothing to do with our ParkFlyer podcast. But thanks for bringing that out.
As long as you're not sensitive about it, that's all I want to make sure of. Because it looks good on you.
No, it's not. Yeah, well, thank you very much. Well, is there any questions you have about CGs or anything that you guys want to, kind of bring up? I can answer questions or whatever for you.
Well, I was ready to say real quick, since we're on the topic and you're getting new batteries or you get a new motor, like Alaska Mike's his setup that he was talking about, and you touched upon it just lightly, is that you want to make sure that you have the right escape, BEC escape combo with that particular aircraft, depending on what you do.
That's true.
Right. So that people forget about that. They may go get the new motor, they got a new setup, or they got a larger prop. You're putting out more amps, and you have this little dinky, escape in there. Or let's say they did what you said. Let's say I went and I got a motor, and being a typical American, I went from a plane that had 3 cells to a plane that had 6 cells. So now I got a hell of a lot of performance.
Right.
But I got these little micro servos and I had 8 of them in there, but I'm using my old escape. So bad things can happen, right?
Well, we talked to Alaska Mike about that with his little Tame Cat episode, is that, he was browning out his servos because he didn't have the right. Yeah.
Yeah, but I fixed that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of that, we didn't touch on that last time, but, you've flown that thing with the what do you call that? The resistor?
No, it was a capacitor.
Capacitor, that's what it is. And you've flown the thing with a capacitor, and it's been working so far?
Yeah, it works fantastic. I had another problem that was kind of weird, and it's not really escape related, but it's related to solving that problem. It was having trouble binding, and I couldn't figure out why. Well, it turns out that my transmitter was putting out too much signal,
too
I
much
guess.
Power.
I don't know what I would call it properly. so it's supposed to go, it can't go higher than 2,000, I think it's microseconds is what it is, technically. And if it does, then it won't bind. And this is
so you were standing real close with the transmitter, or too close, and you were overpowering it, huh?
Well, in this case, it's the actual output was higher than the 2,000 microseconds. So I had to change the output level to below 2,000 so that it would actually bind.
So how'd you find that out?
Something you had to change in your radio?
Well, I figured that out because I was trying to, just back to this is why I'm talking about it, because of the escapes. I was trying to set the, how if you put the throttle all the way up and you can set
calibrate it.
The calibrate it, right? Well, it wouldn't calibrate and it wouldn't bind. So it turns out that, so then I started lowering the throttle down a little at a time, and it turns out it started binding. I was like, what is going on there? Huh. And I figured out that because the transmitter was outputting too much signal, or like I said, I don't know how you talk about this because I don't have that technical knowledge, but I know that the output was saying 2,048 or something like that. As soon as I made the output only go below 2,000, then it would bind more consistently.
I wonder if you had walked, across the room.
It probably would have.
That might have made a difference, but I did stay away from it when trying to bind it. But I mean, this was the better solution in my mind.
Well, yeah, if you have the ability to dial it down, you can know. Is it like a rheostat, or you just digitally dials it down?
Digitally did it. Yeah, there's output limits you can set.
I got this big
tune in Tokyo,
big old metal knob. Turn with both hands.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, but the capacitor thing works fantastically, I haven't had a brownout since. So
well, that's amazing. I would have never guessed that would have worked the way it's working, but I'm impressed. I have to tell you, I would not have thought about that, and unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess for me, I've never had a brownout in the servos, but.
What?
But yeah, that's. You don't use the same cheap gear I use.
Is this the first time you've operated your radio? What did you just say? You've never had a brownout? What?
I didn't say I never had a brownout. I have had brownouts.
I was just making
I have never had the servos.
Your doppelganger was sitting here on the podcast with me.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
No. I've had plenty of brownouts. It cost me 1 or 2 airplanes, but. No, I've just never had the servos brown out.
Okay,
Mike was having that problem. I've never had that problem. So it was interesting to me that he was able to put a capacitor on there and actually make it work.
Yeah, it's kind of neat that it did.
Yeah, that was good that you were able to find that. So we'll pass that along to our listeners if they have issues like that. send an email to us here, and we'll send it over to Mike, and he can
figure it out for us.
you.
Hey, so Mike,
no doubt.
Yeah, it's really easy to do. I found it right on RC
There
groups.
you
That's
go.
how I figured it
Our
out.
favorite.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think everything's on RC groups at the moment, but
Yeah, there's a
So
lot.
I did know that about the Tyrannus radio, that you were able to play with your outputs like that. I mean, I think on our Spectrums, the only time we can play with our outputs is only when we're hitting our, binding button and you want to do a range check,
Right.
a range check button.
right.
It's the only time that we can actually change the output on our radios, I think.
Well, you could change it by changing the percentages.
What percentages?
Percentages.
You know how you do like low rates, high rates, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
You could adjust it that way.
Okay, so we're talking two
I'm
two
confused
totally
'cause
different things then.
We are. I'm just saying you could achieve the same goal.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Well, anyway, your Tyrannus radio definitely has a lot of extra knobs, buttons, switches,
Yeah,
and
that's-
twiddly bits. That's for sure.
No question.
Yeah, nothing like twiddly bits.
Yep. Hey, and they just came out with a new radio.
Everybody
didn't
needs some of
they?
those.
Like a QR7 or something, or Q7, or
The QX7, yeah. It's a more of a, I would call it more of a beginner radio, but it has all the twiddly bits that Jay's talking about. You'd want to have.
The
I mean, really,
twiddly
it's a nice radio for the price.
yeah. So I mean,
Which one is it? It's the what?
QX7.
yeah,
QX7,
it looks cool. I think it comes in some cool colors. I think. I think I saw some things where you're able to swap out the cases and stuff, so you get some far out cases, and it looks good. The price is under like what, 150, 125 or something like that. So
It was yeah, definitely under 150. I think Aloft has them. I mean, I would probably get mine from Aloft.
like once again, I'll just living in the future is cool. That's all I got to say. Compared to the old craft radio
I
that
agree.
I started with back in 1983, 4, 5.
Oh,
And I found it
absolutely.
when I was moving to
Yeah.
come down to Texas, and I was like, "Holy crap!" I got a hand crank to crank the battery. The servos are big and clunky. It was had like, instead of 3 leads, it had like 7 leads. It was it was pretty neat. Had a small car battery to power the system.
Well, I mean, we are lucky that technology is, moving along with us, and it's almost to the point now, though, that technology moves so fast that by the time you buy something,
It's obsolete.
it's already
Right.
obsolete.
Well, it's like a phone,
which is
right?
kind
On
of
our phone.
stressing.
I
Yeah.
have the new whatever Samsung something, and by the time you actually get it in your
That's
hot
true.
little hands, hey, coming out next quarter, makes this thing look like a
Right.
rock. So,
Exactly.
one of the things I
No
noticed
doubt.
is like quadcopters, with the boards. So
Mm-hmm.
the boards were 50 by 50, centimeters or millimeters or whatever. Then the standard was 30 by 30. Then it went from just having, just keeping it, being able to stay level, to actually being able
Right.
to control with, GPS, barometer. Now they have, not only that, they have onboard displays, all those other features, all in that 30 by 30 little board. Plus, they're no longer just 3 pitch stabilized. Now they're 6 or 8 or whatever. It's crazy.
Well, and on top of that, now, like, I think it's the Mavic Pro or whatever quadcopter. You can do hand gestures and all that other stuff. So that, I mean,
Well,
that's even
they have a New York
over
model
the top.
for those guys when they do hand
Yeah.
gestures. Yeah.
I don't think it
Get
has
outta
anything for
here,
that type of
yeah.
hand gesture.
Anyways.
How you doing?
Yeah. You want to make something
That's
of it?
too
Hey,
funny.
hey. So,
It's going to be great when they put a voice modulation in the quadcopter where he says, "I don't understand that hand gesture." Oh, yeah? Well, how about this one, buddy?
exactly. Oh,
That'd
my.
be funny. Well, it's been a great night. Hopefully you've gotten some good information on CG and how important it is to have your airplane balanced and that the weight is correct. We wish you the best of luck on any of your maidens out there. If you got a good CG and the weight is correct, you should have a fairly good maiden. So let us know how it goes.
At least enough to
here
get it
at
back to
ParkFlyer
try it again.
Podcast. What's
that?
that?
At least enough that you can get it back to try it again. Like you may have some other things wrong with it, but at least if the CG's
true.
decent, you can try those, work out the rest of those kinks and bugs.
Yeah, that's true. So just remember, if you have a 3D type airplane or even a trainer type airplane, if you're balancing it any further past the wing spar, there's probably an issue, and definitely go on to RC groups or wherever you can find some forums that talk about that particular airplane, and maybe somebody will give you a correct CG. If it's a flying wing, it's what did you say? It was half. So here's the half, right? Well, Mike, once again, we love having you on the ParkFlyer podcast. We're going to have to make this a regular thing because we sure enjoy having you participate with us. You got some good information, good stories, and it's always a pleasure to talk.
Well, thanks. I appreciate being on the show, and I enjoyed hearing your guys' stories as well.
Well, if you have any topics or anything that you want us to talk about, give us a shout at the ParkFlyerPodcast.com. For those of you listening all over the world, from Arizona, I'm Michael.
Texas, I'm Jay.
And from Alaska, I'm Mike.
And we wish you a happy night, and we'll talk to you again in 2 weeks.
See ya.
You have been listening to the ParkFlyer podcast. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to your next visit. Please give our show a star rating and review, and feel free to email us your questions, topics, or suggestions to parkflyerpodcast@gmail.com.